and welcome to another week of Shack Attack. Myself and Aqeel, neither of which are in studio this evening, of course. We're keen to speak to each and every one of you and connect with the occurrences of this past weekend, as well as something that took place early in the 2000s with lasting effects for a man named Sibu Siso from this part of the country. But first, we're going to be speaking about Khabib Nurmagomedov, and I don't know how he says it, in his language, but I've come to understand that this name is actually has origins in Arabic as well, and as many countries have adapted linguistically the Arabic language to different regions, we come to know his very mispronounced name and surname. But we are interested in discussing dawah and sportsmanship and how this has played out throughout history. With Muhammad Ali, for example, and now with Khabib at this point in time. And we have Imam Ahmad Deeb, who is an Imam at the Toledo Islamic Center, and that is in Ohio, in the US. And so someone that's passionate about youth and about development in the community, but also who took to Facebook to speak about this phenomenon of somebody in UFC that also stands as a pillar of strength for Islam, by means of manners and by means of speaking and being principled. And of course, we witnessed this through the media, that we are able to engage Khabib through, of course, having not met ourselves. But we welcome Imam Ahmad Deeb to Shack Attack this evening, and looking at this sporting phenomenon with the Dawah phenomenon as well, and hoping to learn much from the likes of Khabib as well as even Imam Ahmad as well, as we observe the way that the world changes through social media, and the way youth as well have been reacting to the wins and successes of the lives of Khabib. So, firstly, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to Imam Ahmad, and from myself and Aqeel, and we're very happy to have you this evening. I know that scheduling time with a long time zone difference is quite difficult, but we're really happy to have you this evening with us.
Thank you so much. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. It's a pleasure.
So, any opening thoughts on what took place at the weekend? Obviously something exciting. The whole world watching what is after all a form of art or martial arts, or of boxing, and something that then later on, the aftermath of which we witnessed somebody then leaving the profession or the industry at the family of his parents or his mother. So we witness a few moments where obviously accelerating lead up to what took place, and then post that something of a sujood shukr, and mention of family dynamics as well. Where does this leave onlookers, in terms of witnessing Islamic principles being spoken to the public? From your perspective, Imam, I know that you wrote quite a bit about it on Facebook, but now hearing from you directly would be of benefit. So yes, please speak to us.
All right. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. We first, as always, begin with the name of God, the most merciful, the most kind. We ask him to send his peace and blessings upon our noble messenger Muhammad and all messengers that came before him as guides to humanity. My sincerest salam to all the beautiful Muslims of South Africa, or Joburg in particular. I assume everyone who knows me knows how close your country is to my heart. It's like my second home. So I'm very, very honored to be here. And there's really a lot to say about this. I was actually writing like a small article just yesterday about one particular kind of lesson. And it was hard to write it because there's so many lessons just from that one incident. But one of my friends, he said, Dr. Yusuf Patel, actually, who's from Cape Town. He was one of the students with seminary. He told me, Ahmed, he's like, don't forget the secret's in his name. SubhanAllah, his name is Habib Nur Muhammad. And when I first heard that, I was like, I thought of the verse in the Quran, right, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, like, yuriduna an yutfi'u nur Allah, like they wish to extinguish the light of and many scholars say that, the light of God is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam,
mm,
right? The light of God is the light of Muhammad. And this is what he's called, the beloved, right? Habib, the beloved, the light of Muhammad. So, that would be really something to understand in the very beginning, is that this person comes from a noble lineage, and a noble lineage founded upon the spiritual principles that inspire courage, that inspire bravery, and that inspire steadfastness, right? It's not just an identity religion. This is what I find very, very powerful about Khabib and about Muhammad Ali and those like them, that they're not Muslim on the basis of identity. They're not Muslim on the basis of, it's cool, I'm Muslim, alhamdulillah, I was born this way, whatever it may be. No, they're Muslim. You can very clearly see their Islam represented in its spiritual principles that, again, inspire all these beautiful characteristics. So, I think people like him are so important in the day and age now, especially when not just young people, sometimes we say young people, and we forget that not only young people are going through like a crisis of confidence. Like in America, you see your people depicted in a certain way enough, and that's going to have an effect on you. It's going to, what we call, right, internalized racism. This is a thing. So it's not just young people that need to see this, it's adults. And what do they need to see in particular? They need to see someone navigating a field where they have a platform, a massive platform, I mean, again, like what I wrote, he's arguably the biggest name in sports, period, not just in fighting. And go there, and it's not even a show for him. This is what I find so amazing about Khabib. It's not like a show. When we used to play FIFA, like that was the thing we wanted to do, is like after you scored the goal, like you will press a little button, you make sujood. That was a really cool thing. But you can tell for him, it's not just, all right, well, time to make the sujood. It comes out of him naturally because he's a person of faith. Those spiritual principles are ingrained. And for young people and adults, for people to see someone in a field that, as you can see with the Conor McGregor fight, not very friendly to Muslims, in a world that's incredibly hostile to Muslims. As one of my friends, he's a comedian, Ismail Lutfi, he says, a lot of the people hate us in the world. China hates us, India hates us. That's pretty much the whole world, right? Because there's a big population, right? So in a time where there is such acceptable public hostility towards Islam, and then you see someone so beautifully, so naturally represented, not just in his bravery and courage and his strength, but also in his upholding of his religious principles. So, I'm an imam, so you gotta stop me, when I'm talking too much, and but that's all.
No. So I'm sure Aqeel has something to say. But I think you're right. It's not just the young people that can look at this and say, but how do I do this in my own practice in offering things for things that I find successful in my day, or how do I deal with loss? Because, some people have dealt with loss and have then looked at this as a lesson for them as well, as to how do you honor your parents in their absence and so on. But Aqeel, I'm sure you're also wanting to say something, so I won't take your time too much as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Imam, you really set the tone of this discussion beautifully. Discussing the way that he expresses this love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and for the Sunnah, and the way he carries himself. And the question then for me was, is there, I think Khabib kind of represents a specific way of holding oneself and showing this kind of sense of strength and of steadfastness and I suppose the question then comes to me is this the way that, is there a specific way in which Muslims are meant to carry themselves? Are we meant to carry ourselves with, and similarly to the way, for example, Umar radiallahu anhu would carry himself, or the way that Khabib would carry himself now, which is with this immense, kind of sense of control and power and yet respect in that? Or are there different ways in which Muslims should, are allowed to or should carry themselves?
MashaAllah, that's an excellent question. Actually, I'm really glad you asked this. What I would say is that what we learn from something like this is not necessarily like an archetype. Okay, we have to move away from certain archetypal ways of looking at religious expression and religious being. Now, what I would say is there's a really amazing quote in Arabic that describes wisdom. Okay, and the quote is al-hikmatu فعل الذي ينبغي في الوقت الذي ينبغي على الشكل الذي ينبغي. That wisdom is to do that which is appropriate at the time that is appropriate, in the form that is appropriate. So why am I mentioning wisdom? Because I think every single circumstance has its own unique expression. What we have to do is develop the wisdom necessary to know, okay, in this circumstance, it requires this stance from me. In this circumstance, no pun intended, it requires this stance from me. As the Prophet ﷺ, one of my favorite stories to tell young people, he when they were making Hajj, the companions, when they were making tawaf once, he told the companions, he said, show your shoulder. You ever wonder why we show our shoulder? Like while we make tawaf? He said, expose your right shoulder, because I want them to know that the Muslims are strong. Right? So this is an incredibly profound lesson in wisdom, that depending on your space, your religious, spiritual principles are required to inspire within you the wisdom to know, right, this is how I should behave. And that's not to say like in one certain, it's not to say fake, right? That's not to say like we act here and act differently there. It just means, hey, with Connor, you're going to show a little bit more bravery, or not bravery, you're going to show a little bit more forwardness, right? With someone like Justin, you saw Khabib and his amazing, like praising him, still courageous, still brave, still strong. But I think really when it comes to how we should exist as Muslims, we really have to return to this idea of wisdom. And the last thing I would say, and why I mentioned archetypal forms in the beginning, I find those to be incredibly dangerous, because you mentioned Umar radiallahu anhu. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu is seen as this like very macho, I'm sitting on a horse and, my feet touch the ground type character in our tradition. But then he's also the person that said, if you cannot cry, you should force yourself to cry. This is the same person. He's also the same type of person that would make rounds, and when he stopped to hear that a mother and her daughter were struggling financially, he couldn't hold himself from tears. I failed. When the Prophet ﷺ gave one of the companions the names of all the hypocrites, what did Umar radiallahu anhu do? He went and he said, am I amongst them? He didn't say, like, where are they? Let me get them. He said, am I amongst them? So I think many a times we have a tendency, and by the way, this comes from where we are, okay? So if Muslims are taking a beating, or at least globally on media, then of course, what is going to inspire us are people like maybe Salah ad-Din, or the archetypes we think of that describe these people. But we also have to recognize, Sayyidina Abu Bakr was brave too. Sayyidina Abu Bakr was brave too. And not every single person is going to stand on a horse and their feet are going to touch the ground. And I say that to say that we all have our unique personalities, our unique capacities, and it would be unfair to say, hey, you see Khabib, we all got to be just like that. No, I don't know if I have the capacity to be just like that. But you know what I have the capacity to do? Is to recognize the principles, the spiritual principles and the religious principles that allowed him to show that bravery and courage and commitment. And that's going to look differently depending on who we are and depending on the space that we're in.
And I think that's quite true because as people who are interested in alternative sports or of a more aggressive nature, and that can play into this idea of a violent Muslim or a Muslim that likes fighting, or a hot-blooded person. It's important to know that there's someone that can straddle that same identity with being principled and spiritual, and akhlaq, underpinning that. Because I look at our youth now, and I feel that we are challenged to almost be passive, to not appease others, but almost to fit in and to make sure that we just behave ourselves and don't ruffle too many feathers. And the opposite is also true, where it's no, we're standing up for our deen, and the way we do that is to argue on social media that if you're a snowflake if you don't this idea of Samina wa ta'na, being something that we tell Allah, but then when there's this notion that if an alim comes to you with something that you don't agree with, that you the one should just agree, or and if you don't agree, then you're weak in faith, and the only way to manifest faith is to do that with a very angry gusto. So there's two extremes. The one extreme is put in to a mold and just behave yourself and don't disrupt the social status quo. On the other hand, it's no, go out guns blazing. Disregard COVID-19 restrictions because it's a Kafir state telling you to do that. So even to just apply that to our average lives as people now outside of a sports or public sphere, what would you say? How do people find that middle path of being relevant to every space that we're in, or appropriate to every space that we're in? Because I think that's what you mentioned earlier. It's being wise to know when to act, how in terms of which space we're in. So how do we go about doing that? And I think before that, we have a comment from Aqeel Hendricks, one of our Facebook listeners. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep us humble in the most beautiful and merciful ways possible that leads us towards His love and pleasure. Amen. But yes, Imam, if you could please comment on that. How do we go about fine-tuning ourselves to act with wisdom, irrespective of where we are at the time?
I mean, it's a beautiful. I mean, you guys are asking really hard questions. MashaAllah, beautiful questions, excellent questions. I think in the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's role, okay, and when He describes him, he in the Quran, Allah describes his title, and that his title being وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We have not sent you except as a mercy to mankind. So we know that the default of the Prophet ﷺ, and by extension the default of every Muslim, is rahmah, which comes with it gentleness and kindness. So that is something that is non-negotiable. Okay, how that is expressed, now we come to this other discussion, is the Prophet ﷺ's approach. And the Prophet ﷺ was given 3 tools. Okay, Allah tells him, الكتاب والحكمة ويزكيهم, right? كما أرسلناك رسولا منهم يتلو على كما أرسلنا فيكم رسولا منكم يتلو عليكم آياتنا ويزكيكم ويعلمكم الكتاب والحكمة. That we have sent with you that a messenger from amongst yourself. It's a fascinating verse because, again, knowing the people, being of the people, I've sent you a messenger from amongst yourself. And that's not a side note, by the way. We're talking about wisdom. It's important to, لَيْسَ كُلُّ حَقٍّ يُقَالُ. In other words, not every truth is said depending on who you are. Part of wisdom means maybe on social media, you shouldn't be saying anything. Maybe it's not your place. Maybe you're not the best person to give that advice. So we have sent you from amongst, we have sent someone from amongst you to purify you, tazkiyah, and to teach you the book and the wisdom. Okay, and this configuration These three things are mentioned many times in the Quran when it comes to the Prophet ﷺ's tools and role. And that is, again, what? You have this idea of kitab, which are, here is the religion, okay? Here's revelation, the book. Here's revelation. Here is our understanding of it. How? Now you have hikmah. Hikmah is being able to, and this is who the Prophet ﷺ was for us, being able to take that Quran and say, all right, here's how to apply it with wisdom. So it's not enough to have knowledge. You have to have wisdom. And then the third was this idea of tazkiyah. Tazkiyah being a consistent commitment to spiritual growth. Because tazkiyah means spiritual purification, but it also means growth. And that's how God describes success in the Quran. So how does this relate to wisdom? How can we take from this an understanding of how to be wise? Well, it's very simple. You can't be wise without knowledge and a commitment to spiritual purification. Oh, that's really simplistic. How does that work? Well, it's very simple. So if I'm instructed to be brave, okay? If I'm instructed to be brave in the face of challenges, and let's take it even further, in battlefield, right? Unanimous. You got to be brave in battlefield. No one would be like, well, you know, maybe like go and reason with them while they're like about to strike you with their sword. No one said, we understand you got to be brave. But we also know, and this is beautifully exemplified from the story of Imam Ali, radiallahu anhu, when he was in the battlefield and he struck someone, that person fell to the ground, and Imam Ali was about to finish him. And what did the man do? The man spit in Imam Ali's face. Imam Ali put back his sword and walked away. Tazkiyah. Because when they asked him, what did you do that for? Well, you didn't finish him, right? He's a disbeliever, or he was an oppressor, whatever it may be. He said, at first, I was fighting for God. Okay? I was fighting. So he had the knowledge. He knew what he was supposed to do, and he was sincere. He was fighting for God. He said, then when he spit in my face, I became angry and I was afraid. I was afraid of killing or harming anyone on the basis of my ego. So I had to walk away, right? So it's not enough knowing all the information about a particular thing, about a particular issue, and then doing your little like tweets and Instagram posts and stuff like that, which is great, right? It's not enough to know. It's important to, is this the right time to post this? Am I the right person to post this? But then what is more important than all of that when it comes to wisdom is, what effect will this have on my spiritual health? Do we take a second to breathe and say, hey, is there going to be benefit to what I'm about to say? Am I doing this on the basis of ego? Or am I doing this on the basis of actually having something beneficial to say or to do? And, I would conclude by saying, brother Aqeel can probably speak to this more better than I can. When you live in a world of imbalance, and when people are imbalanced, when it comes to wisdom and how to carry oneself, well, it's like medicine. Sometimes you're way over here and you need a higher dose of something else. Okay. So maybe you guys work with young people, and maybe in a particular area, like it's particularly, people are just generally insecure, very insecure because of certain circumstances that happen. Like physicians, you got to go, okay, well, how do I, in a very healthy way, increase a little dose, not just regular courage, but increase the dose a little bit to bring that balance, okay? And this is what we have to do. And I wish I can say, hey, there's a really quick quote online, solves all of your problems, and it shows you how to do it. There isn't. But we do it by remembering, is this the right time to speak? Is this the right time to do something? Am I the right person? Is this the best way? And most importantly, what is the effect that it's going to have on my and people's spiritual health? God knows best.
Any closing remarks? I don't want to take too much time repeating what you said. I think it speaks for itself, Imam. But if Aqeel doesn't have anything to say, I don't know, Aqeel, let's check with you if you do. But obviously, then looking to closing remarks on on the Khabib issue in general, before we close at 12:30, which we have to do quite soon.
Absolutely. I think the final kind of question for you, Imam, is I think the one thing which has astounded a lot of us is just the nature of the way certain, Muslim, prominent Muslim people, for example, religious leaders or muftis, or in this case, Khabib, carry themselves. And that serves as a greater inspiration to most people than anything that they achieve, or how many people they speak to, or how many fights he's won on the trot, or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
How is it that we take those lessons and instead of just talking about them or putting them online or posting them on social media and having that discussion, how is it that we take the lessons they have so gracefully given to us and imbibe them into our own lives so that we have the capacity to carry ourselves in whatever our daily activities are, whether it's sweeping the street or fighting in a ring with millions of people watching?
Beautiful, mashallah. I think we have to believe that our deen is universal, our religion, right? The Prophet ﷺ was sent lil alamin. He was sent to everyone, to all that exists. One of the greatest unfortunate realities that exist in many of our communities is that our insecurity manifests in that we don't even believe our religion has anything to offer anyone anymore. We just think it's something that we do in the closet and we'll go about our lives, but there's nothing about our principles that are universal enough to, who knows, maybe remove injustice, or who knows, transform societies. And this is ironic because, like in America, the best-selling poet is Imam Jalaluddin Rumi, an imam and a faqih, like a Persian scholar centuries ago, the best-selling poet year after year, because in the deen are universal principles. Now, we have to mine those, okay? And that is really, number one, education, like what you guys are doing. We have to use these opportunities and say, like, what can be gleaned from this? Oh my God, Khabib left millions of dollars for his mom. Wow, let's remember the story of Uwais al-Qarni, who didn't even go to meet the Prophet, peace be upon him, because of his mom. What an amazing principle of faith that he implemented that has precedence and all the way centuries ago. Let's look at the companion who the Prophet ﷺ said, don't go to jihad, as much as he wanted to, because he said, stay with your mother, that is your jihad, right? So we look at these lessons, we take these opportunities, and we seize those moments. This is something that a lot of religious leadership have to do, which is why I commend what you're doing. A lot of people like kind of look at it and just ignore it, or they jump on the bandwagon too late. No, we got to seize every moment to educate and glean these wisdoms. But secondly, and I'll conclude with this, I think it's important to recognize it's not enough to talk about things, but to recognize that spiritual transformation, akhlaq, adab, having a spiritual presence is contagious. Where the Prophet ﷺ, he said, the true friends of God, the awliya, the greatest, those who have reached the height of spiritual actualization, he says, they are those when they are seen, God is remembered. So it's not just a matter of knowing the lessons, but to inculcate those in our communities in brotherhood, as spiritual fraternities, so that people enter those spaces. A young person meets both of you and says that you don't even have to say anything at all. You're just like, wow, these guys are amazing. I want to be like that. And this was what Khabib showed us. That he doesn't have to have good English. He doesn't have to give a khutbah or halaqah. But just by seeing him, you think, wow, I want to be like that. And that's the effect of his spiritual presence and you seeing God in His face. سيماهم على وجوههم. والله تعالى أعلم. God knows best.
I think with that we close this evening's discussion with nothing further said or needing to be said. I think a lot of work needs to be done now. I think that's the challenge being put forth by Imam Ahmad Deeb. Somebody said that Imam should actually speak to us at some point about navigating social media as well, and the adab of doing that, which we all tend to lack often. But we thank you for your time, and we hope to reflect on moments like these as they present themselves, and seek them as well, if possible, so that we remain students of life, inshallah. With that, we greet you, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To listeners, please do stay tuned for the next segment, inshallah. Take care, Imam Ahmad, and to all of your fellows in that part of the world, we wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
Please stay tuned, as after the break we'll be speaking to the first Black African man to summit Mount Everest, and we can all reflect on what that means for us in our own life journeys and goals. That's something we'll be speaking to you about after the break, inshallah. So stay tuned.